Well, welcome to this afternoon's webinar, part of the Knowledge Miles series of lectures, sponsored by the 695th Lord Mayor of London, Professor Michael Manelli. I'm very pleased to welcome today Annie Warburton, Chief Executive and Clerk of the Goldsmiths Company, to the session on Our Future is in the Making, Craft, Innovation and the Genius at Our Fingertips. Very much looking forward to this. I'm Mike Wardle. I'm the Chief Executive at ZN. My job today is to moderate the session and to keep us in order and keep us to time. And so my first task is just to do the introduction, which I'll get over as soon as I can because you don't want to particularly hear from me today. Then we'll be passing over to Annie for her keynote presentation, and there'll be a Q&A session towards the end of our time. If you haven't used GoToWebinar before, the way in which you can ask a question or make an observation is to find the questions tab on the dashboard on screen, type in your question or your observation, and we'll come to that during the Q&A session. But you can put your question in at any time during the broadcast, so if a thought strikes you, don't lose it. Make sure you strike while the iron's hot, put your question in, and we'll field those when we get to the Q&A session. A couple of housekeeping notes. We are recording the session today, so that if you think you've missed something you want to go back and rewatch, or if you have friends and colleagues that you think might be interested in today's topic, then the recording will be available online in around 24 hours, and we'll be emailing out to those of you here and others who registered just to alert you to the recording going live. The second point is if you do ask a question or make an observation, we will share your contact details with Annie. So if there's any need for follow-up discussion or comment, that can be made easier. Finally, the chat message you saw when you signed in said that the slides will be available. They won't, actually. These slides are going to be kept private and won't be circulated. So just so you're not disappointed by that. That's all, I think, by way of introduction. I'd like to very much introduce Annie, who is the Chief Executive and Clerk at the Goldsmiths Company, the first woman to hold the role in nearly 700 years of the history of the company. Annie's a writer and TEDx presenter specializing in design and craft, previously CEO at Cockpit, which was an award-winning UK Top 100 social enterprise. As Creative Director at the Crafts Council, she led research, innovation, and education initiatives, and has done a lot of work on UK and international exhibitions. I won't go through everything that she's done, but is really, Annie, we're really pleased to have someone so well qualified to talk to us today on the subject of craft and the genius in our fingertips. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I am just going to share my screen, and there we are. So thank you for that kind introduction, Mike. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure and honour to be part of this lecture series. The challenge that the Lord Mayor, Michael Manelli, set us speakers was to dream about the future and to explore how city institutions might be relevant to the wicked problems that we face today in a context which is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. Well, that's quite a task. And you might be asking yourself, what on earth does an institution that's nearly 700 years old have to do with any of that? Well, in this talk, I plan to show you how what the Goldsmiths is and what we do is relevant, and to make a broader case that craft skills, a craft mindset and craft values are vital to our future flourishing as individuals and as a society. So this is where I am right now, Goldsmiths Hall, built in the early 19th century. This is the third hall to be on this site, which we've occupied since the 14th century. And as you might imagine, we like a bit of bling at the Goldsmiths Company. So here's a little close-up of our livery hall, which is very, very heavily gilded. If I ask you to think about craft, you're likely to have in your mind's eye an image that might be a little bit like this, or perhaps like this. You're going to be thinking about something that is most likely low-tech, old-fashioned, to do with heritage, slow processes, painstaking, using exceptional and exquisite virtuoso skills, but certainly old-fashioned, heritage-based, and, as I say, low-tech. Sometimes craft can be a bit of a four-letter word, and sometimes people think of craft as a hobby or as a pastime, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but it can be extraordinary in terms of professional virtuosity. And certainly the word craft will likely conjure ideas of luxury, and not necessarily something that's essential to modern life. So to summarise, craft can be thought of as heritage, often rural, sometimes a hobby. And I'd like to challenge that by saying it's contemporary, or it's also contemporary, it's urban, and it's professional. And so I want us to ask, what if instead of being a nice to have relic of our past, that being in touch with craft skills is essential to tackle the wicked problems of health, society, ecology, and economy? So as a way into this, I'm going to give you a little bit of context about the Goldsmiths Company, and then I'll come into my main argument, because I know some of you may be familiar with us, and others, like many of my former colleagues before I took on the role here at Goldsmiths, might be asking a livery what? And so more importantly, asking, and why is it relevant now? Well, good question. We're going to come to that. So the Goldsmiths Company was formally incorporated in 1327. This slide here that you're looking at of silversmiths working away with the furnace going, this dates much later, this image is from 1700. And remarkably, the Goldsmiths Company is still doing exactly the thing that it was first set up to do 7 centuries ago. Now, if you think about entities, institutions in our modern world, there are very few that are even 100 years old, let alone nearly 700 years old. And certainly of those that are there are very few that are doing exactly what they were first established to do. And in our case, that is assaying and testing precious metals for their quality, and I'll come on to a bit of that in a moment, and recruiting, training and developing apprenticeships and supporting our craft and trade, and we still do all of those things. So there are really 4 facets to what the Goldsmiths Company is and what we do. And in no particular order, we are a cultural institution. We have a nationally significant collection of historic and contemporary silver and modern jewellery. We put on exhibitions here at Goldsmiths Hall, and we loan works from our collections to museums and galleries right around the country. We have the UK's largest library and archive of jewellery and allied trades. We commission new works, and of course we've got the beautiful scheduled national monument that I'm speaking to you from here today. We're also a champion of our craft of trade, an advocate for the importance of craft, and this lecture arguably is part of that. We offer training, apprenticeships, we hallmark gold, silver, platinum and palladium, and we offer business support to makers of all kinds right around the country. We are also a charitable and philanthropic organisation making grants that transform life chances. And of course, as a London Livery Company, we're a membership organisation and contribute to the work of the city. So I'm going to take us through how we do each of these things through the 4 elements of the Goldsmiths Company. So starting off with the Goldsmiths Centre, I was just chatting to Mike about this before we came online. The Goldsmiths Centre was set up in 2012 as a centre for education, training and business support for our trades. We take on a cohort of apprentices each year, and this year, for the first time, we've taken on apprentices outside of London. We run foundation programs, and we are home to 130 jewellery, silversmithing, and allied companies. And the Goldsmiths Centre is based just outside the city in Clerkenwell. And in fact, if you are interested in visiting, we have an exhibition of new talent which is opening on Thursday, so do go along to that if you have a chance. And really, as I say, this is continuing our mission that we established right at the beginning. The London Assay office has, since our foundation, been testing the quality and fineness of precious metals and hallmarking them. And the very word hallmark comes from the Goldsmiths Company, when jewellers all along Cheapside, now full of chain lunch joints, as you may well know, used to be populated with silversmiths, jewellers, goldsmiths, and so on. And they would come round the corner onto Foster Lane into Goldsmiths Hall to have the company test their wares, assure them of their quality, and then deliberately damage actually a piece of work with the hallmark, as you can see here. We have been doing that for actually before that. This work predates the foundation of the company. So, as I said, I'm here in Goldsmiths Hall, just around the corner, a few hundred metres from St Paul's Cathedral. And here on the third floor of the building, we have a mini craft factory of 60 people working in the London Assay office, testing and hallmarking. In terms of our charity, we support each year some 126,000 individuals across the UK through initiatives in education and also in the criminal justice system predominantly, as well as in support of our craft and trade. Not least the new Goldsmiths Institute at Aston University Engineering Academy, which featured, you may have noticed, in the FT a couple of weeks ago. And this is a brand new centre that's been established to support the jewellery trade in Birmingham. An alliance between businesses and educators to reinvigorate the urgent supply of skills into those businesses. There are many, many more things that we support in partnership with other charity partners, but just to give you a flavour of what we do in terms of our philanthropic work. And then finally, the company plays a role in national life. In 2023, we commissioned this astonishing object, which is His Majesty King Charles III's Coronation Cup, created by Clive Burr and Jane Short, along with many other specialist makers on each of the myriad techniques. I could spend a whole lecture simply talking about this work. Unfortunately, we don't have time today. But my colleague, Dr. Dora Thornton, our curator here, has published a wonderful article on this piece. And if you're intrigued and if you were wishing I were saying more, then do take a look on our website to see this piece. So we're contributing to national life. And actually, to the coronation, we did commission some other pieces. And then we also contribute to national life through an extraordinary event called the Trial of the Picts, which happens every year and is the UK's oldest judicial procedure. Yeah, Mike, you're jumping in.
We've moved off the slide. We're just
I wonder how that happened. Thank you for. I'm going to stop sharing and reshare. I don't know why that happened. Did that just happen, Mike?
Just while you were talking about the Coronation Cup.
Okay. Okay, let's try again. Okay, I think I might need to share my screen rather than the application. And how are we doing? Does that work?
That's worked very well. So yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, everyone. So back to the trial of the Picts, which is a formal court of law. It's presided over by the King's Remembrancer. And the person on trial is the Master of the Mint, as in the Royal Mint, who is also, as you may know, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. What happens is that the Royal Mint bring a sample of the coins minted in that year to Goldsmiths Hall to be weighed and then tested by goldsmiths to assure both them and, most importantly, all the citizens of our country that the coin of the realm is indeed bona fide and is made up of the right metals. Again, a fascinating subject, and one that I could spend a whole lecture on this too. And sorry to be directing you often to our website, but there is a marvellous film that tells in detail the story of the trial of the Picts. And this is really a very important piece. It looks like it might be only high pageantry, but actually it has a very serious intent, which is assuring us of the quality of coinage that we are able to use it. It protects consumers, but it also protects the integrity of sterling. So that's a quick whiz through what the company does. And now I'm going to move us on to a slightly wider subject, but the topic of this talk, which, as you know, is about what I would call the intelligence in our hands. If we think about the five senses, I would argue that touch, or perhaps the sense of smell, but touch and smell are the two that are most neglected, that we take for granted. And yet we know as human beings that one of the keys to our evolution, along with language, was the use of tools, was this extraordinary sensitivity and dexterity that we have in our hands. And I'd like to put the case to you that beyond being culturally important, and of course craft of all kinds, and now I'm talking beyond simply metalsmithing, but also thinking about ceramics, textiles, glass, wood, and so on, that beyond their cultural importance, which is extremely high, that craft matters to our economy, to our ecology, to individual well-being, and to societal well-being. And here's how. So starting with the economy, here's another beautiful image from the trial of the Picts. The creative economy is one of the UK's largest and fastest growing sectors, economic sectors. From 2011 to 2019, it grew at twice the speed of the economy as a whole. And the most recent data that we've got from the Department for Culture, Media and Sports says that actually that speed continued in the last year, for which we've got data. For the previous government, it was a UK priority growth sector, and it looks set to remain so for the new government. It employs a vast number of people, not just in the starry creative jobs that you might immediately think of, but in all the behind the scenes jobs. As you know, our film industry is a huge exporter. And then there are all the so-called non-creative jobs that keep that industry going. So it's very, very important to the UK economically, as well as being part of our identity. And just see. So craft is just one of a number of subsectors within the creative industries, which you can see here. The point I'd like to draw your attention to here is that these subsectors don't exist in isolation. They're interdependent. You can see a character. I'm afraid I'm not a Game of Thrones fan, but from Game of Thrones. And she's wearing a neck piece made by the jewelers Eunice and Eliza. He made a series of pieces for that programme. And craftspeople were at the heart of film series like the Harry Potter series, for example, as well as really supporting our theatre, opera, film industries. So craft intersects with that, as well as with the more obvious places that you might immediately think of, such as architecture and design. These fields are all interdependent. But beyond their relationship with the other creative industries, craft skills and a craft mindset has something very important to give to sectors such as engineering, technology, and healthcare. The images that you've got in front of you here are from a report that I commissioned in a previous role working with KPMG to explore how craft makers and craft mindset brought together with technology and enterprise are driving innovation in the wider economy. To illustrate that a little, what do I mean by craft values and a craft mindset? Well, craft really brings together, on the one hand, human ingenuity, and on the other hand, an attention to quality. And then it draws on human emotional values. One is always in relationship to a craft object and making it for someone. A mindset of iteration and experimentation. Deep specialization in material, often that is tacit knowledge. This comes back to this intelligence in the hand, not necessarily articulable, but is there in the hands, and a problem-solving approach. Now, I'm sure you're thinking, well, there are many other sectors that have one or two or three of those ingredients, but what's particular about craft is this 3D material thinking, bringing all of those elements together. There are a number of examples of where craft makers are or have collaborated with people in other sectors. And I'm going to come on to some of those shortly, which again are in the report, but examples where makers have collaborated with soft roboticists to tackle an innovation problem and achieve a breakthrough. And this is something, just to ground it back into the Goldsmiths Company, that the company too supports. The person you're looking at there is Professor Manish Tawala, who is the Goldsmiths Professor of Material Science at the University of Cambridge. The company supports Manish's work, as well as a number of PhD students at the university who are investigating novel applications of metallic compounds to support not only the jewellery industry, but also the wider industries using those materials. In terms of health and well-being, I was talking about makers collaborating with research scientists. The image that you're looking at here is an early prototype from a project between Karina Thompson, who is an embroiderer, and Dr. Matthew Howard, a roboticist at King's College London. And again, in a previous role, through an innovation challenge, Karina and Matthew met, and they were looking at how might they solve the issue of woven sensors within garments. This goes back a few years, and technology has advanced since then. And as I say, this was an early prototype. If you spoke to Matthew about the project, what he would say is that the mindset that Karina brought through working in a very low-tech way, but through her hands on stitch, created a novel solution for implanting electrodes into fibre for sport applications and for health applications. Matthew took this project on to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where, combined with additive manufacturing and 3D printing of prosthetic limbs, this approach, which, as I say, you're looking at a very early stage here, could be used to create sensors within a garment in order to control a prosthetic hand. And if you think about the context of a country like South Africa and certain communities within that country, then having a technique that relates to the local context, that can be picked up by local people and integrated, is highly important. There are many, many other examples, and at the beginning Mike mentioned my TEDx talk, so this is another plug, I'm afraid. But again, if you'd like to delve into a number of these examples, then that's one place. There are many places where one might hear a bit more about that. And also, we are talking, this broadcast is during London Design Festival, and there's an event opening on Thursday down at the Oxo Tower on the South Bank called Material Matters, which is featuring many of these material innovators, if I've whetted your appetite on this point. There's also a role for craft in what might be a more obvious and intuitive aspect of health and well-being, which is in supporting our mental health. This research came out just last month, where researchers found that through scientific measures of life satisfaction, that subjective well-being and mental health were improved by craft more than going to work. Now, you might think, well, yes, of course, but actually we all know that going to work creates a strong sense of identity and purpose, and is actually extraordinarily good for mental health and well-being. It's why unemployment is such an issue, not only economically but socially. And so it's very interesting to find that craft actually has a significantly greater positive impact on mental health. Research is underway through other streams on why that might be, particularly in how it affects the dopamine receptors. There are many other studies happening there. So we've talked about economy and we've talked about health. Now to ecology. Again, there's a very intuitive way in which one might think that craft contributes to more environmentally friendly ways of being. It's slower, it's more considered, it takes into account the provenance of materials, and certainly if you're a maker, you're much more thoughtful about where material comes from. But over the last decade, there's been a more adventurous approach to materials coming through the craft sphere. And that is with makers looking for alternatives to plastics, predominantly using materials biomaterials such as food waste, or mushroom mycelium is extremely popular. But thinking rather than thinking of waste as waste, taking a circular economy approach to repurposing waste, just seeing waste as yet another material. And to just give one illustration from this slide, on the right there, you've got Fernando Lapos, who is a designer educated here in the UK, but from Mexico originally, who has found a way to repurpose heritage maize husks to create what you can see behind him, which is a patterned veneer which has been used for multiple interior design and interior architecture applications. He's gone on to develop more materials and approaches, but this is really his groundbreaking material. And then to draw your attention to the chair in the centre. That chair is represented in both the collections of the Victoria and Albert Museum and the Crafts Council collection. It is designed by Jane Attfield. In the early 90s, she was a pioneer of repurposing plastic. Now, this kind of look is very common and familiar now, but back 30 or so years ago, it was groundbreaking and came through craft practice. Jane went on to found a company called Smile Plastics, which is now a very established manufacturer of recycled plastic materials, again for interior and architectural applications. So just a little flavour. Each of these I could delve into detail and trying to give you a little bit of a sweeping view of the importance of craft. And lastly, craft brings us together. As I said, it's relational. One is always making something for someone and often with someone else. So craft can connect us historically or even way back ancestrally into ancient history. This shard from Orkney, from the Neolithic World Heritage Site there, was discovered back in 2021, and you can see there the fingerprint left on the clay vessel. And to me, this is so visceral, it's so immediate that you can feel that imprint going into the clay, preserved, the immediate connection with another human being. Our fingerprints, as we know, are what make us unique, and there it is, that connection across thousands of, well, across millennia. And then in everyday contemporary life, on the right there, you've got an image from Playground Collective, but connected to its application for mental health. Making things brings people together. It transcends boundaries and differences, whether of belief, politics, or creed, that people can share in making. This, as you can see, is quite a lot of messy fun. There are more serious approaches too, but just to illustrate that celebratory togetherness of how satisfying it is to make something. So I'm going to wind up in a moment, but if you were listening to the weekend news on Radio 4 yesterday, you might have heard an item on this, which is about the Palace of Westminster's restoration, and an item that noted that Historic England had just published, or has just published, a report on the serious shortage of skills in traditional building crafts. In fact, so much so that they estimate that restoring the Palace of Westminster, if it fully goes ahead, could tie up a third of Britain's professional craftspeople. Just for that one project. So I've put at the top, what's standing in the way. This is really to make the point that in our education system, the arts in general and craft and making and design in particular, those 3D skills, have systematically over decades been devalued, have lost their parity of esteem, and have lost priority in competition with other subjects. Now, this is not to say that other subjects aren't important. They are all important. But if we're not educating people to make, then we're really missing out on something. The rather wonderfully named Professor Roger Kneebone, a professor of surgical education, speaks about when his first year students come in these days, they are of course super, super bright. But to be a surgeon, you also need that 3D thinking, the intelligence in there, in your hands. And Roger says that students these days simply don't have that. So he starts out with his first year students with a ball of clay to help develop those fine skills. And whether you're using, whether you're doing robotic surgery, it's about the thinking and the mindset and knowing how it is in an embodied way. So to just wind up, I'd like to offer you an invitation next week. Goldsmiths Fair opens here at Goldsmiths Hall. So if anything I've said today has intrigued or excited you, or you'd like to just pop in and see the hall, then now's your chance. Hopefully you might buy some jewellery from one of the 136 exhibitors at the fair. So please do come along if that at all interests you. And just to close, if we think about what craft is, it's about taking a raw material from the earth and having an imagination of what it might be, applying exceptional skill with that imagination, bringing the two together to create something unique, to create something useful, beautiful, or both. And that's why craft matters. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Annie, for that run across many years of history and many facets of both the Goldsmiths Company and creative industries. Really, really interesting. Just picking up on your point about sort of schools and education and how we move ahead. Wondering, in your experience, what is the current route by which people find themselves into goldsmithing, silversmithing, some of the crafts? Where's the feed coming from for the future?
Yeah, well, that's a really, really interesting question. I think there are a couple of aspects to that. First is that 46% of professional craftspeople are on their second career. So this tells us something, because a lot of parents don't know that craft can be a good, solid career to pursue. And so if you've got another skill, you're steered by your parents or your school in a different direction. Number one. Number two, as I said, there's a real disparity in terms of access to materials and equipment in school settings. And so you might be a talented goldsmith, have a latent talent, but you're unlikely to discover that unless you're put in front of a piece of metal, right? And so those 2 points go together. So the first route is as a second career. Another route is through word of mouth. So you will find, especially in the goldsmithing and jewellery industry, that often it runs through in families, that if your uncle or your auntie or your mother's brother-in-law, or whomever, someone in your wider extended family has a job in the trade, then that's how you're going to find out about it at the moment. There's a great initiative that again has come through the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, but has involved a lot of other partners, called Discover Creative Careers, which is really trying to address this, to show the myriad of careers that if you develop these skills, you might end up working in film, you might end up working in architecture or engineering, not necessarily in craft, but that there's that whole breadth.
Thank you for that. Shane Drinian's got a question. He says, have you thoughts about what could be done to push our economy to assume more craft characteristics? He comments that it seems like our current trajectory has been towards more disposable, low-cost consumption rather than one which values reuse and thoughtfulness. Are there policy solutions or things we can do to sort of drive in the opposite direction?
Well, great question. I'm going to take a couple of tacks on this. Right now in Venice is a month-long exhibition, or rather series of exhibitions, called Homo Faber, Man the Maker. And it's set up by the Michelangelo Foundation, which was founded by the directors of Richemont, the luxury goods business. So they've identified that in especially Italy and France, but in Europe more generally, there's a competitive advantage in things that are beautifully well made and well crafted things, and they want to amplify that. It's an extraordinary exhibition. So I think the first thing is really showcasing, from a policy point of view, one needs to bring policy makers' attention to how strong the craft economy already is and how much stronger it could be with some strategic investment, particularly going back to skills. But not only that, I think another policy lever would be on tax breaks, which have worked very well in other parts of the creative industries. Innovation incentives. So I talked just about one partnership there. There's one or two makers that have been supported through Innovate UK to develop and then scale their work. And then thinking about a different notion of growth, because the sense of that question was quite philosophical. So, we can have growth by creating great, huge, mega firms, mega international firms, or you can have growth through a proliferation of many, many small firms. But for those firms to really flourish beyond being a lifestyle business, then they need access to finance. So this is my last bit of policy lever, which is that still investors across the creative industries, this is an issue, don't really understand the business models of a creative business, which operate differently from some other sectors. And that's not an argument for exceptionalism. It's an argument for we're missing a trick at the moment. On if we just got our investment together, we could make a real difference to celebrate craftsmanship.
Thank you for that. I was intrigued by your talking about new materials. I just wondered whether there's an international dimension to that. And, developed economies can develop new materials. They've got lots of research going on into these things, but actually some of these materials would be really useful in the emerging markets. Is there kind of international cooperation on this type of development?
In my experience, in an ad hoc way and very much through individuals. I mean, I talked specifically about Fernando Lapos when during the presentation, who's an example, but he is one of many people who come to one of two colleges here in London, Central St Martin's or the Royal College of Art, which have exceptional education in this area, and over the last 15 years have really encouraged material innovation, actually in that side, particularly at Central St Martin's, which has a course dedicated to that. So on the one hand, you've got international cohort of students who are coming here into the UK to learn and experiment, and then they are dispersing internationally. I can think of someone in Norway, I can think of someone in the Netherlands, I can think of someone in Chile, etc., and bringing that mindset, those skills, that thinking, that experimentation, because that's at very early prototyping stage, to work in well, not even in their countries, and sometimes in their countries or sometimes in a new country that they've chosen to go and live and work in. But at a policy level, I haven't seen much movement or collaboration on that. I think it's still quite tricky for people to get their minds around this idea that craft has a role to play in the innovation of new materials and in repurposing of waste in particular.
Thank you very much. We've got time for one more question. Shane Drinian's come back to the question, and he's just wondering whether you have thoughts about how the school curriculum can better inculcate craft values. Such people may not go on into craft industries, but they will have some basis of that thinking in their future careers.
I think it should and ought to, I'm bound to say this, aren't I, but it should and ought to be a core part of the curriculum. It's an essential life skill. One of the heartbreaking facts is that the most common reason for a garment to be discarded is because a button is coming off and someone doesn't know how to sew it back on. I mean, it's a basic skill of repair. And so we should be educating ourselves in all these areas. But to address it at curriculum level, you need a strategic approach. You need really good connection between local businesses and schools, so that the businesses are articulating what skills are needed. I'm thinking about places like Hoyk in the Scottish borders, or the leather industry in Somerset, etc. You know, there are many examples, or ceramics in Stoke. So you need really good collaboration there. You need dedicated investment in teacher CPD, most teachers paying for their own continuing professional development. And you need a strategic approach to highlighting the careers and business opportunities that are available in this field.
Thank you very much. We've got a question from Ed Adset Grant, really asking, are the city liveries in a growth phase or struggling overall, which go beyond the scope of Goldsmiths. But Ed, will come back to you on that. I know that there are even new liveries being created, so I think there may well be a growth phase. We have run out of time, I'm afraid, and so I will need to move on. So just to say that we have, of course, further events coming up in the Lord Mayor's Lecture Series. We're not yet at the end of Professor Michael Manelli's time as Lord Mayor. And on Tuesday, we're looking at innovation in mental health and the Galanos project. Galanos is a project that Michael Manelli has very much got off the ground in terms of mental health research. On Thursday next week, The Lonely Brain, How Designing for Brain Health Can Help Tackle the Loneliness Epidemic. On Thursday, the 26th of September, Ethical Digital Technology, Fact or Fiction. So more fascinating subjects coming up, and do keep an eye on the website to keep an eye on what's coming. Just remains for me to do a round of thank yous. First of all, to you, the audience, thank you so much for your attention and for your questions, your engagement. Always good to see you, and we'll see you at future events. And finally, a huge thank you to Annie for a fascinating lecture. Thank you so much, and we really do appreciate the efforts you have made in bringing this to us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.